Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Chicagoland for the NRG Series Modern Showdown. I am Devin O'Donnell, also known as Doomwake, and I am here with Niall Joan Rivers, and we're going to be watching some amazing modern content now. Talk to me about this weekend. What are you looking forward to the most?
Yeah, I mean, it is a very exciting weekend. This is, part of the championship series, but this is the last event of the weekend. So we still have some spots for the invitational up for grabs. We've got players fighting for their life for these last few slots. And I mean, I am excited to see some modern gameplay today. I think the format is pretty exciting. We've seen some pretty cool decks popping up recently. I personally have been really interested in the blue-black frog lists that have been popping up, so I hope we get to see some of that, but what about you? What are you excited for this weekend?
Well, like you mentioned, the modern format is in a pretty good spot right now. There's a lot of interesting decks. There's also been a lot of interesting churn within the Magic Online metagame with, the uptick in Belcher. There's been various interesting energy builds. There was like a Jeskai energy build that was popping up past weekend, which we might actually get to see in our feature match. And then, like you mentioned, there is a ton at stake this weekend with regards to, we're still trying, we got 7 spots to fill in that end of year championship. We got some two players who are going to be winning the showdowns this weekend, as well as the at-large bids. So there's, like you said, a lot to play for here, ton and tons on the line. With regards to that end of year player leaderboard, let's see if we can take a look at the leaderboard to see who we have in action this weekend. So in first place, Fletcher Johnson with 70 points. Right behind Fletcher is Cliff in second place with 63 points. Those two players are actually going to be, well, both in our feature match, not against each other quite yet at least, but we're going to be featuring both of those. The players that are highlighted on this list are players who already won invites to the end of year invitation. So Kamari, Garrick, Theo, Wesley, Sean, Frederick, and Charlie are already qualified. But even here, Zoe, Reed Anderson, Hunter Ovington still in striking distance for those at large bids. So this is for the season 2 leaderboard. Now, the other thing that these individuals are playing for is the MVP or player of the year, as it were. So if we can take a look at the season long leaderboard or entire year leaderboard, we can kind of get a better idea of who is in the running for that. You have Garrick Alford in first place at 135, Cliff right on Garrick's heels at 120, Harrison 118, Sean 113. And then you kind of see go from there. And one thing I want to mention is that the individual who wins the MVP at the end of the season, Niall, they get free entry into all events in 2025, which is pretty sick.
Yeah, a huge reward. And, Garrick, a pretty nice lead here, 15 points above second place, but cannot rest on their laurels just yet. There is a huge point spread this weekend. I mean, everyone in these top, I don't know, 6 to 8 slots are really live for taking that first place spot. I mean, anything could happen this weekend. There is still so much magic to be played.
Absolutely. The last thing that we want to go over here before we get down to our feature match is what these players are playing for. So now, you mentioned we talked about the year leaderboard, the season leaderboard. There's a lot of points on the line. So first place is going to take home not just $2,400 in the trophy, but also 30 points. And you mentioned with how close the MVP season is, how close the season 2 leaderboard race is. Those 30 points can go a really long way. And then, second place, 1,225 points, third and fourth, 820 points. So even just for, a top 8 appearance, still a lot to play for. So that is what these players are playing for. Now, when it comes to our feature match, now we talked about Fletcher Johnson a little bit. Fletcher Johnson, both on the season 2 leaderboard and the overall leaderboard, kind of having just an absolute banger of a season. Fletcher is playing the sort of recently popular mono blue Belcher deck. Now, if you've seen modern games in the past, you might associate Belcher with, rituals, red green, pyretic, desperate ritual, sometimes the 4 mana one that I can't remember the name of that makes 7 mana. But Fletcher is actually playing mono blue, so no rituals, bunch of counter spells, versus Kris Hammon on Gruul Breach. Talk to me about this matchup now. Who do you think is favored in this one?
Oh man, I mean, First of all, I feel like any modern deck that's running for the One Rings, you gotta feel pretty good about. I mean, that card has just been dominating the field entirely. But I mean, we're looking at two, decks that really want to combo off quite a bit, right? Like they're both trying to do pretty crazy combo things. I think it's kind of hard to really know who's got the edge in this one. What are your thoughts, Doom Mike?
Yeah, I was thinking because Fletcher does have a lot of counter spells. If you take a look at the deck list, Fletcher is spotting 4 Flare of Denial and 4 Disrupting Shoal, along with 3 Pactive Negation. So I would have to imagine, Kris is the Gruul Breach deck, I think, is playing a lot on its own turn, where you're trying, like you said, you're trying to deploy things like the One Ring, set up some mana ramp, and then, ramp, curve that into some powerful, expensive plays. But if Kris decides to play on their own turn, then that could be a little difficult, playing into Fletcher's counter spells. So I think I would like the mono blue Belcher side of things, as we see Fletcher start off with a turn one spend Lotus Bloom, turn two Thunder Trap Trainer. You know what I really enjoy about the Thunder Trap Trainer? Now, a lot of times, it does say you find a non-land card, but in the Belcher deck, it kind of just does allow you to hit your land drops, which I find kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a very nice addition to this deck from Bloomborough here. Looks like we are going to see it resolve and
Yeah, Fletcher taking a look at the top 4 cards, really deep in the tank here. Not exactly sure what he wants to grab here. We see the hands over the mouth. Yeah, as far as the start for Kris is concerned, you can't be too upset about an Ugin's Labyrinth and an Eldrazi Temple. But one thing that's worth noting on Kris's side is no red mana. So, for example, even if Kris were to deploy a second copy of Ugin's Labyrinth, Fletcher is not there's no threat of Through the Breach, as we see. That's an alternate art card. Any ideas, Niall?
I mean, that's one of the OTJ ones.
Is that is
Oh,
that the one commandeer?
that
I think
might
it
be the commandeer.
I think it might be.
Let me see.
Yeah, I believe that. Yeah, that's the only one that makes sense here. So I think
Yeah, that
Fletcher
is
did.
commandeer, guaranteed.
Yeah, Fletcher did pick up the commandeer. So it's interesting. Commandeer is kind of funny because if you commandeer through the breach, looking at Fletcher's deck list as far as creatures are concerned, I mean, I guess you can put in a trainer or a Philology Archaeologist to get the trigger off of that. But yeah, not exactly the card that Fletcher wants to. As we see, Boseiju, who shelters all. That one's interesting. Plays well against counter spells. Notably, Commandeer does not counter the spell; it takes control of it. So that is kind of an interesting dynamic here.
Yes, definitely very interesting, but I mean, still quite the fee to have to, commandeer and like you said, not get much of a payoff for it.
Yeah. All right. So we see Fletcher takes the Lotus Bloom down to 1, threatening a whole bunch of mana next turn. Kris has to have that in the back of his mind. And Fletcher, we know that the Commandeer was picked up. Wants to. Looks like the hand is a couple of Into the Flood Maws. Or hold on, no, that's not in his main deck. I can't tell what that other card is. Looks like a couple of lands, as we see a land come into play untapped here for Fletcher. Access to 3 mana. A couple Temeshis. Okay. So talk to me about this Temeshi, because we've seen Temeshi and Lotus Bloom a lot, but it's more of like in various combo decks, but it's not necessarily comboing off here per se, right?
Yeah, I mean, Tameshi, a Kamigawa card, 3 mana. When one or more non-creature permanents are returned to hand, draw a card once per turn. Uh, you know, like you said, not really a combo piece. We have that once per turn line of text on it, but you know, a a nice bit of value there to just be able to draw a card.
Yeah, as we see Ugin's Labyrinth going to pick up the Devourer of Destiny. We're going to. Ooh, okay. So we're replaying the Ugin's Labyrinth and exiling Ulamog, perhaps signaling a through the breach.
Could be. Oh, this is gonna be a one ring, actually.
I mean, that's a pretty good, pretty juicy commandeer target.
That is a very juicy commandeer target. Could this be a little bit of commandeer bait from Kris?
Yeah, I mean, like we said, the commandeer is face up, so Kris does know about the commandeer. So, and with the Beseiju in play, knows that can't really Beseiju out the through the breach. So it kind of makes sense to bait out the commandeer. And if you're in Fletcher's side of things, can you really afford to let it resolve? Yeah, we're
It's
going
such a
to.
tough position. Oh, a Flare of Denial, sacrificing the Thunder Trap Trainer.
So, with regards to the flare of denial and the commandeer, talk to me about why you think Fletcher would use the flare there instead of the commandeer.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, so, we have the Beseiju on the board, which obviously can make our breaches uncounterable. So Flare not very useful in that situation, but uh, is very useful against this one ring where Kris cannot make it uncounterable with Beseiju. So I think Fletcher maybe suspects that this is bait and is wanting to keep his options open for a potential breach that could come through.
All right, and we see a lot of mana here for Fletcher. So this is kind of where the Tameshi really comes into play. Tameshi with Lotus Bloom, just able to generate a ton of mana because you can return a land to return an artifact with mana value X. So for 1 mana, Fletcher can sack the Lotus Bloom for 3, return a land using one of the mana, and then return the Lotus Bloom as well. So able to generate a ton of mana here. Now we'll have to see if Fletcher does have the payoff. We are gonna get is that oh yeah, Seagate Restoration Hardcast. You'll love to see that one, Niall.
Yeah, huge card to be playing. No maximum hand size the rest of the game.
Just a cool draw 7, no big deal.
Draw 7 cards.
All right, now that we've drawn 7 cards, surely we found a payoff, and I do see a Belcher now. But because we've had to use 7 mana to cast the Seagate, Fletcher with not quite enough mana left over to deploy that Belcher. I believe you can sack for 3. I don't think Fletcher's made the land drop return. So if you play land untap, that's 1 mana. Sack the Lotus Bloom for 3. That's 4 -1, 3. Pick up land, return Bloom, 6. Actually, he might have enough to still Belcher plus activate here.
Let's see. We've got 3 mana here. We're bringing it back. Now we're at 2 mana.
And then you sack the Bloom for 5. Land for turn, float is 6 mana. -1 is 5. Pick up the land, return Bloom. That's 8 mana. That's enough for Belcher plus activate. Yeah, and Fletcher, looks like we're going for it.
It's like he's thinking here for a second. Maybe just making sure he has it. Maybe somehow doesn't have it or doesn't think he has it.
Perhaps, yeah. Maybe just doing a little bit of counting in the head. I mean, it's tough when you got 14 cards in hand. There's a
Mhm.
lot of options for Fletcher here. We will have to see what Fletcher decides to go with here. I mean, assuming that I did my math correct, which there is a possibility that I've not done my math correct because math is, maybe not my strong suit here. All right, so we are just going to deploy the Belcher. All right. Now, it's going to be tough for Kris to resolve something relevant here because we know about the Commandeer, which,
Mhm.
as you mentioned, because Fletcher decided to use the Flare last turn, still has access to the Commandeer for that through the breach. So, Kris doesn't really have anything that can play through the Commandeer. We could devour the Tamesh. Oh, okay.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so Devour Tameshi. That means Fletcher's not going to have enough mana to activate the Belcher next turn. This got a little interesting, Niall.
Yeah, that is very interesting. And I mean, the life totals here are very relevant with Fletcher at 8 life already, having to bolt in multiple lands this game.
Yeah, and Kris presenting lethal in play. Kris has got 9 damage, Fletcher at 8. Those land it's really cool to be able to play with lands that are also spells, but there is definitely a downside to it.
Absolutely, and suddenly 14 cards in hand just does not feel like enough.
Fletcher activated the One Ring a couple of times, but didn't actually have the protection from it, so
Mm.
yeah, Fletcher looking at a bunch of counter spells. I mean, I guess you could go. Maybe can you go untap land, go to 5, play a chump blocker, block the Devourer, take 3, go to 2. But even then, now at 2, I don't think you would have outs on the following turn to activate Belcher. But we will have to see what Fletcher decides to do. And you got to imagine that the Boseiju definitely kind of put a wrench in Fletcher's plans a little bit. I mean, was able to sequence the counter spells in such a way. Yeah, Fletcher's going to pack it in. Interesting.
Wow, extremely well navigated by Kris there. I mean, even with the baiting out of the flare and I think really trying to make Fletcher feel afraid of Breach specifically. When we had this Devourer play just sort of wrapped up. Very, very well played there. And we're going to be going to a game 2 with
Yep.
Kris up
Now,
a game.
yeah, and with regards to sideboard, we could take a look at Fletcher's first, the mono blue Belcher deck. We have 2 Harbinger of the Sea, 2 Consigned to Memory, 2 Into the Flood Maw, 2 Spell Snare, 2 Mystical Dispute, a Tormod's Crypt, 3 Unable to Scream, and a basic Mountain. From Fletcher's side of things now, what do you like here?
Well, I was actually about to ask you, Devin, because I know you stream and you play a ton of Modern. What is up with a sideboard basic mountain?
I think that's there for mostly Boseiju, where if people are really heavy on Boseiju blowing up your lands because you don't have a basic land to search for, I think that's mostly what it's there for. So with correct, I don't know if the Eldrazi deck has Boseijus, but that's kind of what that's there for. I mean, as
Sure.
far as Fletcher is concerned, maybe you're looking towards like the Harbingers to stop the
Yeah.
Soul Lands and the Kasines to stop the Rings. That kind
I
of
feel
makes sense
like
to me.
Consign has got to be a huge pickup against this deck. I mean, we just really got blown out by a triggered ability on the cast of the Devourer there. So those all seem very likely to come in to me.
Perfect. Yeah. All right, now moving on to Kris Hammon's deck list with Gruul Breach. We got 3 Thought-Knot Seer, 3 Willowbreaker, just the cleanest sideboard of all time now. 3 3 3 3 3. 3
Mhm.
Kozilek's Return, 3 Defense Grid, and 3 Trinisphere. Got to imagine those defense grids are slam dunks.
Yeah, definitely feels like the defense grids are coming in. Um, I mean, what are your thoughts on a card like Thought Not Seer against a deck where all of your lands are spells?
It's definitely interesting. You do bring up a very good point. Thought-Knot Seer being able to nab lands, that's not usually what the card is intended to do. So it's, an interesting dynamic of this matchup. I also don't hate the Thought-Knot Seers to be able to just take the counter spells, right? Because
Mhm.
if Kris is really trying to set up and establish a through the breach, then you kind of want to just make sure the coast is clear to try and resolve that the following turn. So I don't hate the Thought-Knot Seers.
Sure. Yeah, and then we have I mean, we have cards like Trinisphere. Is that doing much for us here?
Could be interesting against the free spells, right? Flare of Denial, Commandeer, and Disrupting Shoal, kind of, making sure those cost a ton of mana. And it really all depends on what Kris wants to sideboard out. Like,
Mhm.
does have a lot of good options, but as far as cards we're bringing up, maybe just the Kozilek's commands seem a little mid, and the All is Dusts.
Mhm.
So if those come out, maybe some number of the Trinispheres could potentially move their way in as well.
Sure. Yeah. No, that all seems reasonable to me. It looks like our players have made those decisions and are shuffling up into game 2 here.
Yeah, now we took a look at the sideboards. We saw, Fletcher's sideboard and Chris's sideboard. Do you have any opinions on who do you think improves more in the post board games?
Yeah, I think I would say Kris improves maybe a little bit more in the post-board games. I think that, Fletcher maybe just starts a little bit more advantaged, maybe even stays a little bit more advantaged, but I think to me it feels like Kris is just bringing in a few more impactful options. What are your thoughts?
I would tend to agree with that. Like we mentioned, we talked about the thought nut spheres, the trinospheres, and the damping spheres,
Mhm.
all having a potential, home or impact in this matchup. And Fletcher maybe got, like you said, two consigned to memory and maybe two of the Harbinger of the Seas. But, I think I agree with you. Kris does get to bring on a lot more high impactful cards.
Yeah.
As we see, looks like Kris taking at least one mulligan. I think I saw Gemstone Caverns on the draw. That's a nice one to
Ooh,
have. Little luck
very
counter.
nice indeed. We'll see. Yeah, looks like we're keeping this.
Pre-game effects. Yeah, there we go. Well, look, in order to win a Magic tournament, you got to get a little lucky at some point. So,
And the best time to be lucky is before you even start playing. So uh, love that for Kris.
oh yeah, yeah. Fletcher does have a lot of tap lands, so we're going to start off
Yep.
with. I don't know the name of the land, but I know it's an ETB tap blue white land. That's all that
Yeah,
matters.
that's the Suppression Ray
There you
Orderly
go.
Plaza is the name of the
There you go.
land. And we're just
Ooh,
gonna have
turn two
a
Lotus Bloom.
signet on turn one for, or sorry, a talisman on turn one for Kris here.
Yeah, turn two Lotus Bloom for Fletcher. Not exactly where you want the Lotus Bloom. You'd prefer it to be in the opening hand, but and look, a ton of mana here for Kris. Turn two the One
Ooh,
Ring. My goodness.
turn two, the One Ring is very tough. And that is going to resolve, and we're going to be drawing a card.
Oof. And I did see a Trinosphere picked up there for Kris. So, we talked about those during sideboarding. It looks like those did come in.
And a Harbinger
Um,
picked up on the draw here for Fletcher.
it's not bad. I guess Fletcher's something. Harbinger is good in this matchup, but Kris already has four mana on the battlefield and that talisman to still provide red mana. So
Yeah,
Harbinger shutting off the soul lands, but Kris is still gonna be able to cast a large percentage of his spells.
yeah, including you know through the breach if we need to. So definitely feels like Harbinger, maybe just too little, too late.
Yeah, Kris just like keep the cards flowing here for Kris. And Fletcher didn't have a free counter spell last time. We'll see if maybe he picked one up as a Grove of the Burn Willows hits the battlefield. Maybe Kris has Through the Breach, perhaps. I think I saw a
Hmm.
Trinosphere as well. See if he goes for that.
He will play another talisman, and there
And
is
the
the
Trinosphere.
Trinosphere.
Yeah, so this will really hamper Fletcher's ability to sort of try to double spell, where usually the Belcher deck kind of wants to go, cast Belcher, hold a pre-counter spell, but Trinosphere can't really do that anymore. So Fletcher's in a real rough spot here. I think the hand is two Belchers, two Temeshis, and a Whir. So not a bad hand if he can get one more turn. But the question is, can he get one more turn?
Sure.
See an
I'll
attack in
get
here
in
with
for a
the
little damage.
Harbinger. And deciding to, yeah, we're gonna pass the turn, holding up. It's like holding up War of Invention for 0 potentially, perhaps to get another Lotus Bloom. The One Ring just doing the One Ring things now. Tap that One Ring, just draw a whole bunch of cards. That card is pretty good, huh?
Yeah, it's not bad, that's for sure. So we're gonna see another land come down for Kris.
5
And we're tapping
mana.
5 mana.
It's the magic number. Oh, okay. Well,
Oh, a Kozilek's Command.
it's not the 5 drop I thought it was going to be.
No, it looks like we are exiling the Harbinger, maybe?
Okay. And this leaves Kris with the access to still a whole bunch of mana as the 2 temples and the 3 spawn tokens. See what kind of follow up we have here. You know, we did talk about the Thought Knot Seers in the sideboard. That would be a pretty good time for one of those.
Mm-hmm.
There it is.
There it is indeed.
But Niall, I think Fletcher has 2 Belchers and 2 Temeshis, so this Thought Knot Seer not really going to do that
Whoa.
much. Yeah.
What a hand.
Nice Thought Knot Seer. 2
Nice.
pair, baby. 2 pair.
Nice Thought Knot Seer. With a Lotus Bloom kicker, what a hand.
Yeah, and the second Lotus Bloom too. So yeah, I mean Kris is I think just dead because I believe Kris has already played land for turn, has
Is
access
Kris
to
just dead?
access to 3 more mana.
Well, don't you have
And
to... Doesn't the Trinisphere also affect the Lotus Bloom?
mm, true. So I guess you would need to draw an untapped land,
Because, like, we're gonna have
right?
to cast the Lotus Bloom, right? So, like...
Yeah. Oh well, the Tameshi though. The Tameshi doesn't count casting. So if you go pay
Sure,
3
so...
for the Lotus Bloom, right? Then you have 6, 3 for Tameshi, and then each other mana would represent 2 more. So it would be 9 mana, I believe.
Sure.
Plus the land drop return too. So I think this should be enough. Yeah, Fletcher's going to sacrifice the Lotus Bloom to play the Tameshi. And I believe this should be enough with Tameshi's ability to return that Lotus Bloom.
Turn the Lotus Bloom. We draw our card for bouncing the Lotus Bloom or the land.
Yeah, make 3 blue mana. Can use one of the white mana to return the Lotus Bloom back into play. And then we can sack that to go up to 7 mana, and then that is enough to Belcher. So I believe we are going to game number 2. Yeah, Kris is going to pick him up.
Wow, what a crazy turn of events there. It felt so wrapped up by Kris, but I mean that is what the Belcher deck does, right? Wow, very, very well played by Fletcher. What a hilarious thought, Nansir.
And Niall, that was a turn 2 the One Ring. Right? Turn 2 the One Ring on the draw.
One ring.
Not good enough. Crazy.
That is crazy. But don't use this game as evidence that the One Ring is fine. It's still a problem.
I'm glad you pointed that out. And as far as the sideboard is concerned, we kind of already went over those. We saw some sideboard cards in action. We saw the Trinisphere and the Thought Knot Seer from Kris, as well as the Harbinger of the Seas from Fletcher. Probably not a ton is going to change between games 2 and games 3. Fletcher going to take a look at the sideboard. But yeah, I mean, we're going to see Kris on the play for game number 3. And I mean, I still think I agree with you with regards to who improves more in the matchup. I still think I like Kris's side of things. But man, this Belcher deck is really powerful.
Yeah, no, the Belcher deck, very, very strong indeed. Do you think there's anything Kris could have done in that game now that we have, the power of hindsight to play differently, maybe utilize the Kozilek's command in a different way? Do you think there was any way out, or were we always just dead to the 2-pair hand of double Belcher double Tameshi.
So it's awkward because I guess Kris did have the second talisman that game. So Kris did, I believe, have the option to hold up the Kozilek's command on the Tameshi.
Hmm.
Um, and like we talked about, the Trinosphere kind of sort of cutting out the Lotus Blooms. Well, not cutting them out, but making them less explosive.
Hmm.
So Fletcher, if they're, let's say for example, Kris left up, I don't know, um, even if Kris left up the Kozilek's command that turn, I guess you could also exile the Lotus Bloom, where you could
Hmm.
go, if Fletcher goes to target the bloom with Tameshi, you go X equals 3, exile the Tameshi and exile the bloom, and that almost certainly buys you at least a turn. So
Hmm.
it's possible.
Yeah. Well, no, interesting. A lot to think about there.
Yeah, for sure.
It looks like our players are shuffling up, getting ready for our third and final game of the match. This time with Kris on the play, although really felt like Kris was on the play last game. You know,
Yeah,
I mean,
Gemstone Caverns.
the caverns into the turn 2 One Ring, just a nutso start.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and Fletcher Johnson, as we mentioned before, quite near top of the leaderboard for both the season 2 and the season or at large season long leaderboards here. So Fletcher playing for a lot. I saw somebody in chat and asked the player count. We have a total of 144 players for today. Excuse me, who are all battling it out for the prizes, the points, everything on the line. And we get players shuffling up and drawing hands for game number 3. Kris on the play. So maybe he doesn't want the Gemstone Caverns this time.
Yeah, maybe not. We are seeing look like a Devourer in hand for Kris, so might still have some pre-game actions here.
And looks like Fletcher is going to throw it back. So Kris is going to keep 7. And Fletcher is going to throw it back. So yeah, as far as, I was going to say, does play draw sway your decision? But I think we both like Kris, and Kris is on the play. So, I think I still like Chris's spot in this matchup.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I feel like the Belcher deck is one that you can probably mulligan somewhat aggressively in, right?
Mhm.
Um, and also, as we just saw, is one that can sort of just win from any position if you don't have the right interaction at the right time. So, and I think it's one where Fletcher is really always in it. And, I think anytime you're playing against decks like that, there's just always a level of fear. No matter how good your board state is, no matter how good your hand is, there's always just a level of, well, what if they just like have it on me?
You're
And I
never
lose.
safe.
You're never safe.
All right, so Kris is going to start us off with a turn 0, or I guess turn 1, Devourer of Destiny. See what Kris is going to exile here. I'm going to get rid of a Breach, a Sowing Mycospawn, and a land. And we'll have to see exactly what Kris leads off with. Ooh, Ugin's Labyrinth, perhaps a turn 1 Talisman. That's
Oh,
a pretty good start.
very good start. Very, very good start.
I wonder if you're in Fletcher's spot, if you have I wonder if he's thinking about Commandeer. Okay. I was gonna say if we got a Commandeer, I don't know if I would do that, but it would be a really sick play.
It would be a very sick play.
Just a Bayin Veil for Fletcher on turn number 1. Now the question for Kris is, do we have turn 2 One Ring again? Of course we
Oh my
do.
god. Incredible. But Fletcher, we fought through this before. Can fight through this again.
Well, Fletcher fought through it before, but Fletcher in game 2 had an entire additional land in play. Right now because
Yeah.
Kris did the same thing on the play as opposed to the draw, so Fletcher is down a mana, which might be a little more difficult. but we'll have to see what Fletcher has cooked up for us on turn 2. We're shocking, so presumably probably has one of the 2-drop creatures, either a yeah, there's the Philagi.
Mhm.
See what this hits.
This could be huge. There's a bloom in the graveyard.
I think it's Bloom, Jwari Disruption, and Waterlog Teachings. I wonder if it's too slow for the Bloom. He already has one in hand, too.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Very interesting spot.
It's kind of cool that the Waterlog Teachings can actually find a counter spell. It's a little mana intensive for sure. I think Fletcher is looking at a Philagi, a Lotus Bloom. All right, takes the Lotus Bloom and says, "I hope I can live 3 turns."
Go drawing more cards with our One Ring.
Mm-hmm.
Doing as the One Ring does. A little Ancient Stirrings.
Oh yeah. I think that Kris, with those 2 Lotus Blooms suspended, probably wants to try and find a Trinisphere here.
Mm-hmm.
See exactly what Kris is looking at. What are we thinking about here? It's hard
Yeah,
to get
really
a
in the tank.
look at what Kris has got. That's a Myco spawn.
Yeah, very, very strong, very annoying creature.
Yeah, that card, when I saw that on the spoiler, I wasn't necessarily convinced, but the more that I see games play with it, just the fact that even if it gets countered, the trigger still happens, kicking gets really,
Mm-hmm.
really powerful, you get, effectively a 3-for-1. That card is a huge part of these Eldrazi decks.
Yeah, it is. It is very powerful. In second One Ring,
Mm.
the ring is good at anything. It is finding One Rings.
We're chaining them. Oh, was that a third? It was a full art foil. I couldn't quite tell what it was. All right, Fletcher's going to take these blooms down 2. Let's see what we pick up for the turn. That's a Seagate Restoration. I believe the hand is Whir and Philagi and a couple lands. Looks like Sink into Stupor, Seagate, and I want to say a Jwari.
There's the next archaeologist. We've got a Suppression Ray, a Sink into Stupor. Not sure what the third card there is.
I think it might just be another DFC. Looks like we're going to go with, thinking about the Rays. Not sure. Fletcher in the think. He wants that raise. He's really thinking about that raise. All right, decides to go with the sink.
And gonna play our land for turn.
Seagate tapped. Let's see what Kris finds off of the ring. I saw Through the Breach. Should we get a large creature, maybe? Perhaps. I think that might be a Boseiju who shelters all as well in Kris's hand, so might actually want to wait on the Through the Breach. Maybe Kris figures they have an extra turn here because those blooms are only on 2. So, even if Kris decides that they want to go for the breach, maybe wants to wait a turn, or might just have a second one in hand anyways.
Looks like we are kicking the Myco spawn.
Mm-hmm.
Getting rid of one of the Seagate lands.
Yeah, what a card this Myco Spawn is. Like I said, this
What
is
a card.
Yeah, just being able to 6 mana, blow up a land, go find your own land. It can even find utility lands. I mean, Kris already has the Boseiju in play, but could find, Cavern of Souls in some of the other versions. I've seen it find Shifting Woodland, Urza Saga. It's just a phenomenal, fantastic card.
Yeah, really, really crazy.
All right, Lotus Bloom's down to 1. Fletcher finds a Tameshi, but Lotus Bloom's not in the correct zone for that Tameshi, unfortunately. Does have a flare, although flare's, no, the flare is no good because of that Boseiju. I guess what we can do is if we have an additional untapped land, we can hold up Sink into Stupor,
Hmm.
because I believe the Sink into Stupor gets around the Boseiju, right? It just returns the spell.
Yeah, I mean, it buys us a turn, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, return target spell or non-land permanent. So
So it looks like we
that,
just played it as a land.
yeah, Sink's going to be played as a land, but it is nice for Fletcher that that does get around the Boseiju uncounterable
Hmm.
aspect. So interesting to see if maybe Fletcher has another copy in hand.
Yeah, kind of hard to see the hand right now. Kris has more mana. Ooh, and an Emrakul going under a Labyrinth. Ooh, and
Hmm.
there's the defense grid.
Well, that's gonna okay. Okay, this is good. Well, for Fletcher, if you're a Fletcher fan, because we can go flare sack and then still hold up the sink. Yeah, looks like Kris is tapping that Boseiju for mana. There's the Through the Breach, but yeah, Fletcher lined this up perfectly. Has the sink for the Through the Breach.
Whew, huge. And then we're going to draw 3 cards off our One Ring.
Yeah. Now the question is, does Fletcher have the payoff? Has plenty of mana, has the Tameshi in hand, so even access to more mana if he so chooses. But do we have the payoff, either the Whir of Invention or the Belcher? That is the big question here for Fletcher.
Yeah, I mean, this definitely feels like the critical turn.
There's a talisman. Yeah, you can imagine if Kris gets to untap after, drawing 3 cards off the ring, gonna find basically look at 5 more next turn.
Hmm.
Yeah, you would imagine if you're Fletcher, this is probably your last turn.
Yeah, with a Breach in hand and just like a face-up Emrakul.
And last card Whir. Yeah. So that's going to be 2, 4, 7. Going to be a Whir for 4 with a Lotus Bloom activation available. And yeah, that's going to be Belcher.
Wow. Incredible. Very well played by both players. But congratulations to Fletcher Johnson taking this round one, starting off very well into our last event of the year and securing some more points for himself. That was crazy.
Yeah, that was a delight to watch. Even that game 3, Fletcher just kind of sequenced things perfectly. Kris did set up the turn where Kris was able to go defense grid into the Through the Breach with the Boseiju backup, but Fletcher just kind of had all the perfect answers. Flare sacrifice, 3 mana to Sink into Stupor the Through the Breach to get through the Boseiju. So very, very well played here from Fletcher. Our leaderboard, season 2 leaderboard, and the overall MVP leaderboard. So Fletcher starting off with a win, very good for him. And I believe we are going to be going to a backup match where we have the other player who is doing very, very well on the leaderboards this season, Cliff Boyardee, on Jeskai Energy. Now, I kind of alluded to this a little bit when we were talking about the intro, and this is a slightly different take on energy. Talk to me about this Jeskai version compared to maybe Boros or Mardu.
Yeah, I mean, well, in general, the energy decks have just been extremely powerful since MH3 has come out. We've got cards like Flage, Guide of Souls, Amped Raptor, just very, very incredible cards. With the addition of blue, especially in Cliff's deck here, we have some interesting cards we get to add, such as Expressive Iteration, Mockingbird, which is a very cool and very interesting card in this deck specifically. Uh, we are also running the Goblin Bombardment build, which is going to let us, sack all of these little creatures and tokens that we're making and just ping down our opponents. Looks like we're actually seeing the Mockingbird right now from Cliff. Uh,
Yeah, Mockingbird, powerful card, but not the best to hit off of Amped Raptor, because Mockingbird, if you hit it off of Amped Raptor, there is no mana spent to cast it, so you actually wouldn't be able to cop anything. But basically a free body here, free energy because you get the one energy back from the God of Souls. But interesting, yeah, you mentioned the Mockingbird, and it immediately comes up. And then as far as Kevin is concerned, what do we got Cliff playing against? Kevin is playing, I mean, if you are familiar with Modern in, what was it, 2022, you might have seen the Celestia Heliod deck a time or two, but we really haven't seen a lot of it recently. But yeah, this is kind of what you would expect if you saw a deck back then: Spike Feeder, Heliod Sun Crown, Auriok
Mhm.
Champion, whole bunch of one-ofs here to hit off of Collected Company. I like the Agatha's Soul Cauldron in this deck too, doing a lot of cool stuff with like Spike Feeder, Heliod, Ballista. A lot of cool lines you can do with the cauldrons.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of just, you know, gain infinite life, make infinite spawns, all these all these cute little lines, and also, the secret fifth line of text on Cauldron that lets all of your creature abilities work with any color. I mean, just really cool card here.
Yep. So that is what the players are playing here. As we get a little bit into the action here, Cliff's got a God of Souls with a couple of counters, the Mockingbird and the Amped Raptor, and Kevin threatening potentially infinite life next turn with a Heliod the Sun Crown into an Auriok Champion. And Cliff says, "You know what? No, I don't think so. I think I would like to Static Prison the Heliod and get a little bit of energy here. Maybe can follow that up with another creature, put some counters on with Gata Souls, and really, up this clock a little bit. And that's a pretty good one to have."
Yeah, that is a very good one to have with the Ocelot Pride coming down for Cliff Boyardee here. And looks like maybe a little bit of confusion on the Mockingbird.
Yeah, I wonder if not sure. I wonder if maybe Kevin thought it copied the guide, and maybe Cliff was explaining that it couldn't
Oh,
copy the guide or
yeah.
something. I think
Sure.
that maybe that was what that was. Yeah, Cliff lining up an attack for 3, 4, 5, 6 could make it 8. Put Kevin down to 9. Yeah, looks like we are going to make it 8. So that's a pretty big attack here. And then we'll do a quick permanent count: 3, 4, 5. I think it's 8. So not quite the city's blessing for Ocelot Pride. Yeah, we do a quick count, but Cliff's still able to make a token that's going to generate more energy. And yeah, the combination of Guide of Souls and Ocelot Pride, energy has been really, really dominant over the past few months with the release of MH3. And I think these two cards are a big part of the reason why these just they go so, so well together. And they also just really kind of snowball. Like if you're ahead, they even put you more farther ahead. They're just phenomenal, fantastic cards.
Yeah, I mean, I think any deck that was able to hang to any degree during Nadu Summer has to be an extremely powerful deck. And as someone who was very ingrained in Nadu Summer, I feel like Energy was like the deck I saw the most that was not other Nadu decks.
Absolutely. We got a second Auriok champion into a delighted halfling here for Kevin. Got some creatures in the battlefield, but none of the payoffs, right? None of the Heliods, none of the spike feeders, ballistas. So, it's Kevin really just wants to try and find one of those haymakers. As we see a discharge taking care of a delighted halfling. It's going to keep Cliff even on energy. And with Kevin at 13, I'll have to see if Cliff can maybe generate some sort of lethal attack here. Going to pay
This
the energy
is
for the prison.
Yeah, I mean, Cliff building quite the board. Another Amp Raptor coming down,
Ooh.
triggering Guide of Souls, triggering the champions, hitting another Ocelot.
5, 6, 7, and I believe that should be the city's blessing as well. So these two Ocelot Brides are going to generate a lot of tokens at a turn.
Yeah. Which I mean, also going to generate a lot of life for Kevin.
Yep, that's a good point. Two Auriok champions. That is something I hadn't really thought about. Where Ocelot Bride, very good card, but it's actually kind of hard to kill your opponent when they have two Auriok champions in play.
I
I
mean,
wonder if
I feel like if you're Kevin right now, it is all about just living just one more turn, right? Just living one more. You're so many things can just lead to you getting infinite life, right? Like you have so many engines in place. But ooh, Cliff is putting up a ton of damage.
Yeah, and I think if Kevin has something like a collected company in hand, like you mentioned, just as long as we can buy a turn, just wants to try and find a land drop, maybe collected company can hit like, exactly Spike Feeder plus Heliod,
Mhm.
and that could be a way to kind of close the game out, because I don't believe Cliff, realistically has a way to beat infinite life.
Yeah,
There is a finite amount of damage, even though even though it looks like it's a million, it's maybe not quite that much.
right.
So
Looks like we have a Halfling, a Spike Feeder. Not sure what else in hand here.
I think it's Spike Feeder, Heliod, Halfling, Coco.
Oh,
Yes,
missing a fourth land, pretty brutal.
is able to deploy the Heliod here.
Mhm.
And like you mentioned, if Kevin can get one additional draw step, going to be a little less likely now that there's a lot more power in play. But if Kevin can get that one draw step, has the Spike Feeder in hand, and can maybe set something up that way next turn. So yeah, the Heliod coming into play is going to trigger the champions because it will be active as a creature. So yep, we're going to put some counters on there. And that's sort of important because now they're actually reasonable blockers. They can
Mhm.
successfully block two of the 1/1 cats.
Yeah. Got a bolt here.
Upstairs. Bang bang.
Mhm.
Now the real question is, how much life is Kevin going to gain after the two Ocelot Pride triggers?
Oh boy. Oh.
Okay, well maybe he's not going to
Oh,
gain any
well,
life
never
because he's
mind.
going to be dead.
Bombardment will just we'll just take care of that.
Yeah. Goblin Bombardment pretty good when you've made, 12 cat tokens that turn. So that's going to
Yeah.
do it for Cliff Boyardee, taking game number 1 over Kevin Sames on Heliod.
Yeah.
And we will have to take a look and see what the sideboard games look like in just a moment here. But yeah, that was a pretty good showcase. Didn't really get to see the blue cards in action. I maybe saw the Mockingbird a little bit, but wasn't necessarily where Cliff wanted the Mockingbird. So I don't know if we have deck lists available so we can take a look at sideboards, or if we are just ready to go back into game number 2. But as far as that game is concerned, that was pretty interesting. Okay, so that was game number 2. We were misinformed there a little bit. So that was actually the match for Cliff Boyardee taking it down over Jeskai Energy. So interesting to see that both of our players at the top of the leaderboard now, both getting wins. So they're going to be on each other's heels the whole day here.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you're Cliff right now, you need to stay, if Fletcher's winning, you have to be winning. You got to get ahead of him. You need to close that point gap as best as you can. And if you're Fletcher, you got to keep that from happening. You got to all day long keep winning, stay ahead of, especially Cliff specifically, only 15 points behind you. And like we said, there's a ton of points at stake this weekend, but I mean 15 is a good lead and you can keep that up pretty easily.
Oh yeah. So it'll be very, very interesting to see these two players. Maybe we'll get them in the feature match together at some point, but you'll have to
Ooh.
stay tuned to find out. And we will be back here in just a little bit with round number 2. See you soon.